Hey viewers, real quick, click the top link in the video description to join my mailing list. I'll have merch and a book coming out soon, so join the mailing list and I can send you updates on those things. Thank you. Welcome to What the Fact. Today's topic is this. Humans are obsessive categorizers. We come up with rules and qualifications for what puts this object in this category and this object in another category. And this works well most of the time for most of the things around us. But sometimes the exceptions to our rules are so extreme that it reminds us that our rules are completely made up and not always based on things that are real. Before I talk about trees, let's talk about moons. Jupiter has about 70 moons, right? If you Google how many moons does Saturn have, you'll get a similar answer, but you could easily argue that it has hundreds of millions of moons. Why are the fragments that make up its rings not counted as moons? You're probably thinking, don't be stupid, moons are round. No, they aren't. Sure, ours is, and Jupiter's 4 largest moons are, but the rest of Jupiter's moons range from a few hundred meters to 1 or 2 kilometers across. They're just asteroids. And if a 100-meter wide asteroid can be a moon, why can't a 10-meter wide asteroid? Why not a 1-meter wide asteroid? Why not the particles in Saturn's rings? What this proves is there's no such thing as a moon, or at least there's not a real definition. There's no real definition because the way we currently define moons doesn't distinguish our moon from a single speck of dust orbiting the Earth. Defining words is simple, but defining objects is not. A definition of an object, in my mind, means you boil it down to its absolute most basic components. You narrow it down to the bare minimum of characteristics that make something what it is. So what is a tree? Well, it's a tall plant that contains wood, has a single trunk, and is made of specialized tissues like bark, heartwood, etc., right? Some plants, like shrubs, have woody stems, but they're not trees because they're small and have multiple main stems rather than a single trunk. But Salix herbaceae, the dwarf willow, grows to a maximum height of 6 centimeters. It has a single woody trunk and is a member of the willow genus, but is it really a tree? What about palm trees? They're tall, have a single trunk, but palms don't contain wood or bark. Palm wood is a fibrous material that is completely different from true wood tissue. The same goes for bamboo, which produces something that we think of as wood, but it really isn't. Then there are quaking aspens that grow multiple trunks from a sprawling underground root system. That's also different. Tall, made of wood, single trunk, bark. There's an exception to every single rule. Maybe there is such a thing as trees, but there are also imposters. This can be the result of a phenomenon called parallel or convergent evolution. I have a video on my channel that goes into deep detail, but the gist of it is, species can independently evolve the same features or body plans even if they don't share a recent common ancestor. The reason birds have feathers is because the ancestor of birds, raptors, had feathers, so they all inherited it. But look at these mammals. Hedgehogs, porcupines, tenrecs, and echidnas all have spikes. But these mammals are very distantly related. They do not come from a common ancestor that also had spikes. They evolved it independently. Now look at this animal. What does it look like? A cat, right? But it's not. It's a fossa. They're native to Madagascar and they're most closely related to mongooses. Or how about this? They're extinct, but Thylacoleo, or the marsupial lion, although it looks like a cat, is a marsupial. Marsupials have existed on Earth for 100 million years longer than felines. But felines, cats, are definitely a real group of organisms. So perhaps willows and aspens and maples and evergreens are the real trees, and palms are imposters. All we have to do is check which plants are most closely related. If you look at an evolutionary tree diagram, or cladogram, we see different clades. You can think of a clade as a stem plus all of the branches above it. So this is a clade, and this is a clade, but this is not. Palm trees are part of a clade known as monocots, where grass, corn, onions, celery, and most produce aisle vegetables also go. whereas maple, oak, aspen are all members of a different clade called dicots. Okay, cool. So palm trees, which don't have wood or branches, are imposters. True trees are dicots. What's that? Evergreen trees? Oh, come on. So it turns out that evergreen trees, like pine and cedar, predate the other group, which includes both clades entirely. In fact, although maples and pines look much more similar, maples and palms are way more closely related. Also, within the dicot clade, the relationships aren't straightforward. Clades can be broken into smaller clades, and look, maples are part of the same clade as Brussels sprouts, whereas oaks are in the same clade as orchids. Brussels sprouts and orchids are definitely not trees. So the only conclusion is that there's no such thing as a tree. I don't mean trees aren't real, like the conspiracy theory that birds literally don't exist and aren't real. I just mean that tree is not a taxonomic biological group, not a real one. I know that sounds crazy, but saying a maple and a pine are both trees is just like saying bats are birds because they can fly. Evolutionary relationships matter. The fact that most of these plants have wood and branches and trunks doesn't mean as much as you think, because we've seen that they're more closely related to plants that nobody would call a tree than they are to each other. They are all just mimics of each other and not part of the same closely related group. Bats and birds have more things in common than differences, but we know they're part of different groups. The fact that they can both fly isn't what defines them. I know you might be sitting there still thinking, I know what a tree is. But the facts aren't what our gut instincts tell us. The world is more complicated than that. Pretending we know the answers when the evidence says otherwise is not a healthy way to think. I'll leave you with a quote from Carol Cleland, a philosopher of science. Definitions tell us about the meanings of words in our language, as opposed to telling us about the nature of the world.